So I think it's very clear as to what some of the the pros are. Are there any other challenges in the open banking sector that any of the panelists would like to comment on? I think we've heard from a few who haven't been. Ritesh, I think you were going to
Yep,
comment earlier, and then
sure. So
yeah.
being involved with the open banking for from the start and taking that into the different economies and geographies as well. So I'm supporting an advisor for open banking in Africa and taking that to central bank. The biggest challenge in the open banking at this point of time is the security, trust, and basically you are sharing data to the multiple third parties, and that's why security is key part of it. And it opens up a door for the fraudulent transactions a lot more than it is today in a traditional banking system, because your data is scattered with the multiple parties. Because when you think about a bank or a financial institution, there are only two things comes into mind. One is trust and the second is security. So earlier your data was only with one bank and one entity. Now you, with your consent, your data is shared with multiple parties. So yes, there are a lot more challenges in terms of the security. The network need to be much more secure, and that's why we need a strong customer authentication. That's what defined pretty well in the PSD2 Payment Service Directive in European market. And the open banking, it's not a global standard, it's a regional standard. It started from European market, pretty much mature over here. If you look into the number of transactions, that is in billions. As of 2020, those were itself is around over 6 billion transactions that we have seen. So the adoption is increasing in the markets. If you go into the various other market where even if it's not regulated, they are doing far better. Now the challenge comes down, it's a two-facet challenge. One is for the banks to have that infrastructure and open up their APIs and have that mindset as well for building a shared economy and having a partnership ecosystem with the fintechs to innovate. Because open banking, in a nutshell, it's like washing up your dirty laundry in an open space. So the banks need to focus on their legacy platforms and services. They need to gear up to that. At the same time, we need to have a defined regulatory and a stringent regulatory in the various economies. European market, yes, it is started from here, so it's much more mature. US is still living on the data access agreements. If you go into the African market, it is not a regulatory yet. Singapore is far ahead. Hong Kong is pretty much mature. India is leading the way. So yes, it's global phenomena maturing over the period of time. The challenge is security and the fraud.
Uh, I'll just
Great,
add
thank you.
a
Hmm.
few points here. Obviously, as like some of the problems are already solved. Open banking obviously try to provide a proper solution to a patchy work which fintechs has happened. And I think one of the things which we need to understand is it's obviously a little bit of shake up of the big banks, whether we like it, whether we say it in public, but that's what it is all about. It's like a wake up, shake up call for the big banks. Say, you have been good, you have been doing great work, but you cannot sit on there and say this is we are going to be still relevant for the future, because we have done so good to the consumer, to the economies. And that's where this opening of the data vault is essential. And I think Ritesh also mentioned, so there are two or three models which are surfacing across the globe. One obviously heavily regulated, UK, Europe. USA, as it is a contractual basis between a bank and a fintech, and some other jurisdictions are totally unregulated. So I think it's the fear factor or the adoption will also be guided by what kind of role the governments play in these jurisdictions, right? I'm positive that in coming years, the regulated industry will have much higher trust for the fintechs from the consumer side. We would still like to see how unregulated market behaves, because if you ask me, unregulated activities still happen, right? Account aggregation is not a new product. Okay, we have seen it in
Mhm.
working, but how it works is nobody knows. Only the people who probably developed it knows it, right? With open banking, those concepts are coming into forefront. Say, actually, it's not good way of how it was done, and so is for the banking, right? I mean, as I said, like lending and payments are the two other areas. Viewing data is one thing, doing something with the data is the second thing. I think that's where the apps, which can not just visualize the data, but give you insight, right? So whether it is payday loans, whether it is uh, overdraft loans, there are very, very niche use cases which open banking can solve, which banks wouldn't touch it because it probably wouldn't fall into their value proposition. So I think one other thing which open banking is doing to the banks is, what do you think as your value proposition? Or sorry, what do you think is not your value proposition? It might be value for a fintech, and there is a segment for that. And I think in the same spirit, financial inclusion is probably a value proposition for some fintechs. It might not come for all the banks. And I think in futuristic world, the way I see it is, open banking would have ability for a customer to change a bank account within an hour. It should become a habit. I think Western people are more used to this contractual with service provider. I think that's the kind of relationship which we will have in future with banks. We Loyalty has to be earned. It's not earned by that you store data, but by the value of the services.
No, that's why so many people get confused with open banking and data portability, that it is something like that. Of course, with open banking, as you rightly said, we can switch over accounts from one bank to another, depending on our focus, what we intend to do and what we want to achieve. And of course, financial inclusion is the most important thing that can be really achieved. And banks, again, see, banks are integrating to different fintech depending on their nature of activities that they want to perceive and do. So, like the top class banks, they are still into okay, equities, mutual fund, ETFs, all those things. But those banks which are, say, rural banks or cooperative banks, even as a matter of fact, we are launching a neo bank in India next month. So we are into, since financial inclusion, we have tagged and tried to connect to all those different entities which can really provide that financial inclusion. And it is all through API integration. There are three, four banks like ICICI, Federal Bank, RBL. They are connected. They are handling the accounts, funds. Then there are other microfinance entities, Amazon, Visa, Mastercard, all those. So if you take out all those APIs, then there is nothing. So all it is virtually network of APIs, and the focus and the intention, what you want to achieve from your entity. That's how you go in for the integration of the model.